So next, I'm going to touch bases on some fire considerations for our farm. We have touched on livestock evacuation earlier, and just kind of combining thoughts. So this video kind of shows, what do cattle do left on their own? And really, you'll see these cattle basically do exactly the same thing that you and I should be doing on these fires when we're out there dealing with them. So first responders are out there dealing with the incident. The cattle are still in the field here, kind of moseying around. So you can see basically they're looking for an escape route. And also they might be distracted by the firefighters that are working down there as well. You can see they get up close to the flames, they start feeling that radiant heat and realize, oh, we can't go through there. So you can see here, they find that area that basically they've got good, safe, clean black, and they just start wandering out there. So I'm showing this video one just to illustrate that often our animals, if we don't leave them confined in a fence, often they do a decent job of finding safety zones by themselves. The other point too is that we as firefighters, or you on your property, is that the safest area we can be during a fire is basically in that good, clean black, that nothing left is going to burn in that area. And so one thing I'll touch on here, it's interesting in the tactics that are being used here by the firefighters. Ideally, if you're doing basically what they call pump and roll, somebody is driving the engine while they are out there with the hose spraying off the flames, and that's what a lot of the crop producers do as well. Preferably, you would be driving your truck inside the black here. And it appears that, the fire behavior is fairly calm here, but if this fire were to flare up, where's their escape route and their safety zone? They don't have a safe place to go. They're surrounded by grassy fields here. And so if you are driving through the black and spraying instead, if that fire flares up, you're already in your safety zone, no concern. And the other thing too is obviously when you show up on an incident, you're going to, find a safe entry point to get into the fire. I'm not suggesting that you would drive through the flames to get to that safe black. You'd want to be already in the black, preferably in the back of the fire where it's already out. You drive your truck in, and then you would approach into where the flames are at. So a fire starts, and so I'm showing you these aerial photographs from a study that was done in Australia studying different impacts of fire behavior on different wheat fields that were either harvested or unharvested or had already been mowed later in the summer. So basically they had done a test ignition here. This is 21 seconds after the fire started. You can see it's already starting to take off a little bit. And basically I'm going to cover that if you have a small fire, the best thing you can do is what they call anchor, flank, and hold. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is there an area that you can anchor it into? And so with a lot of forested landscapes, you'd be trying to look at a road or, a big fuel break. But it's convenient that a lot of these ag fires, if we're working with grassy fields, basically where we can best anchor the fire in is basically in the safe black that has been created at the back of the fire here. And I also say when it's this small, hopefully you can just pull out a fire extinguisher and help a little bit. But I will mention that a lot of the fire extinguishers we keep on our equipment, they do a really good job when their combine catches on fire to put that out and really smothers it with all the foam and all the other chemicals that are in that fire extinguisher. However, once we start using that fire extinguisher just on grass, often, it will do a good job of not allowing oxygen to get to the fire there within the fuel. And so it helps stop the fire that way. But a lot of that foam basically just sticks to it and the fire can still continue to burn underneath that layer. So you really need to be considering using water once you get a fire that really gets going in the grass, such as in this picture. And again, conveniently let the fire create some safe black for you to anchor that into. So again, the anchor point is just where are you going to start building your line construction off of to actually safely suppress this fire. So speaking of water, I thought this was one different innovative approach to using a tractor that basically, your typical slide-in skid unit that you would throw into the back of your farm truck at the start of fire season. Consider having one of those that basically you could put on pallet forks on the front of a tractor like this. And this is one interesting setup. This guy basically, he had additional hoses and other fire equipment apparatus in the back of the tractor to help balance it out. But a lot of folks online that looked at this said, you really should have another, 250-gallon tank on the back that maybe you could have connected with hoses. So if this front tank runs out, you can just start siphoning and sucking water out of that back tank as well. So obviously there's some constraints with using a tractor like this. It's going to be a very bumpy road to go on. But this is a good way that you could have the hose and the nozzle, and you could be doing some active spraying just as you, the driver. Other people are using apparatus that, they actually have a water monitor thing at the front that basically they can control in the cab, and it will spray the water for it, spray the fire with water for them. So if a fire starts getting bigger, this is 29 seconds after this fire was started. So hopefully, basically, you're spraying water at the back of the fire here to make sure that your anchor point is good and secure in the safe black. Then you would basically be doing what they call flank, that you'd be working on either sides of this fire where the fire behavior is somewhat reduced compared to the very front of it where it's actively spreading. So this is where you would be spraying water. Again, you can see here, this truck here, they're doing the right thing, that they are spraying safely inside the black. In some cases, we can use a disc on some of these sides of the fire that, it's somewhat relaxed fire behavior. We can get away with being in the unburned fields to some extent. But again, like I said, really the safest bet is to work these fires from the black. Another thing I'll also say, when you're using tractors and discs, unfortunately, a lot of these new tractors, they have newer emission standards that the air intake is very sensitive to the heat of the air that's being sucked in the engine. And so if that fire gets too close to the tractor and you get enough radiant heat from it, it then starts going through the air intake, the tractor can start thinking that the engine is actually overheating and will basically, turn off or drop to an idle. And when we're next to one of these fires, that's the worst time that our tractor is going to stop working on us. And so really, if you're using a tractor and a disc, you really have to be careful. You've got to be next to a escape route or a safety zone. So, if you're disking along the side of your field and the road is right next to you to the left or the right, and you can quickly just drive into that. If the tractor decides to drop to an idle on you, that would be a good, safe way to do that. So just keep that in mind. Have good escape routes with your tractors. If worst case scenario, if it drops to an idle, are you going to be able to get to your escape route, get to your safety zone quickly enough, given the fire behavior that you're seeing? So again, here you are, got basically active pump and roll scenario here. The engine here is doing the job. It's in the black. It's being somewhat safe. A little bit of unclean black here, that there are some unburnt fuels that could be a concern. The other thing I'm showing you this picture is just be aware of when we have fence lines that we don't get stuck in these areas. So if you got safe black and you're next to the fence, you're probably going to be all right. But these areas can be really tricky, that you don't get stuck between the fire and the fence. So this image is showing us 37 seconds after ignition. This plot was 160 feet long. So you think about 160 feet in 37 seconds, that fire is definitely actively moving fairly quickly. And this is a day that there wasn't much wind pushing these experiment fires either. So again, at this point, we got our anchor. Hopefully you're trying to flank these fires. But this is when it gets tricky, that we have to decide, when is it safe to say and when do we need to leave? And so often if conditions drop down and fire behavior relaxes, you can get to the head of the fire here at the front where you see the really active flame links. The other thing is, if you're really trying to push it, create a safety box out here, create a midden basically that the head of the fire will come and hit. You do not want to be getting in front of this thing with water or with your disc. The flanks of the fire, like I said, flanks of the fire, you could maybe disc safely, but the head of the fire, you do not want to be disking right in front of it. You want to be creating a midden for it to burn into, several, a half mile away from the active fire front. So the other thing is, just with prescribed burning, basically you're creating a safety mitten here. What's going on with this burn is that they're basically creating a black perimeter around this. So then once they light off the inside of the unit, they don't have to worry about containment. They're going to have to watch for spot fires still, but they're not going to be worried about active flame lengths. It's just going to hit the black and go out. So in some cases, we see that, doing burnouts can be a good solution in some areas, but it takes a lot of coordination with other agencies to do this safely. So keep that in mind. Other thing with safety, professional wildland firefighters always use what they call LCES. So basically have a lookout. In many cases, you need to make sure that you yourself are being on the lookout with what the fire behavior is doing. Have another lookout somewhere else that you're in communication with, that, preferably it's somebody that's not as engaged in the fire as you are. If you're actively driving a truck or spraying water in the flames, having somebody else that's kind of keeping their eye out for everyone else. Have communication so that that lookout can actually tell you what's going on when they see a wind shift or changes in fire behavior. Have an escape route. So always try to have at least 2 escape routes to a safety zone. And again, like I said, clean black is your best safety zone you're going to have. The wildland firefighters, kind of their rule of thumb is that you need 1/10 of an acre for a single fire engine for a safety zone, and it needs to be 40 feet away from flames on all sides. So often, you know, only places we're going to get that size of space in some of these ag fuel types are, you know, on a road, in a gravel area, or in an area that you already have a good, clean, safe black. And just remember, if you're upslope or upwind from where the fire is coming, you're probably going to need to double that safety zone, at least double that, to make it be adequate. The other thing to stress is make sure you have situational awareness. This is a prescribed fire in Oklahoma. And as you can see, they're working on creating that safe black line here before they then later burn the unit. You can see there's an individual out here that's in the outside of the burn unit. And what he's doing is he's keeping an eye out for embers or spot fires. So make sure that you always have somebody, and also this person is being a good lookout in this situation, but just have good situational awareness that, you know, you're keeping your head on a swivel and looking around at all times to see if the fire is spreading somewhere else. Other thing that I touch on every time that we do ag wildfire training is power lines are a major issue. They can start fires, but also when we have a wildland fire incident underneath these power lines, the smoke that's generated from the fire can cause the electricity from these large transmission lines to arc and hit the ground. And so if you're under this with your truck holding onto your water nozzle, you can expect an arc can potentially go through the smoke and hit you in your tractor or your truck down here. And so if you've got power lines, just build a box around them. Do not get underneath of them to deal with a fire. These are 2 fire starts that happened this last fire season here in Wasco County. The one on the left was a fairly smaller fire that happened from this transmission, from the transformer up here that arced. And there was the full story is there's actually a squirrel on the transformer that a farmer I know literally saw this squirrel catch on fire, fall off the power line, and start this small 5-acre fire here. And you can see it was high enough that even scorched some of those orchard trees there as well. This was the picture on the right was where the Rentham Market Road fire started. And I don't believe this was the power line, but it's fairly close to the point of origin on this fire. And you can see on this power line that basically half of the power pole is burned, the other half was not burned in this fire, which is interesting. I think it just happened to be with the direction the wind was pushing it. So next, just touching on some fire suppression equipment considerations. To start with, if you have a water tank on any of the tractors that you're using that you might use for fertilizer or other things at other times of the year, I would strongly suggest that you have those full of water and on a pump that you could use. I'm really going to stress if you've got a bin out wagon, there's really no excuse for you not to have wildfire suppression equipment on there. Even just having a 25-gallon tank is going to help make a difference on a pump that's going to work. So just showing you some examples of grain bin cart modifications that have been done to help with wildland fire suppression. I like this picture here because you can see, I believe it looks like this is a hydraulic motor here that is running the pump to take water from the tank to the hose reel. And this is a hydraulic line going back to the tractor. And so these hydraulic pumps are a great way to simplify this. So you don't have a Honda pump you're having to start when the fire happens. Again, also a nice hole here at the back of the grain bin that they were able to put this. Be creative. There are more places than we realize to put small water tanks on a lot of our equipment. I like this picture because they're using this as basically a recycled fuel tank from an old Freightliner farm truck that they are now using as a water tank. They've got their short spray nozzle here, and they've got their pump here all ready to go. Another thing that I found interesting that on social media I've seen different wheat producers doing is that they basically have these household water pressure tanks that they easily just bolt to the back of their combine and have a small hose attached to it. And, basically they get it pressurized at 60 psi at the start of the fire season, and then they can just forget about it. Obviously, they should check on it. But the nice thing with these is that you don't need a pump. You don't have to worry about your gas engine not starting. You don't have to worry about the pull cord on your Honda getting ripped when you're trying to start it. Basically, it's a system that's ready to go. So this is one consideration to think about as well. And we're almost about to get wrapped up here. But just again, touching on this, what makes for effective fire suppression? Basically, you need to be at the right time, at the right place with the right tool. And so what I mean by right time is often, as the weather and the winds calm enough that you're in a safe, opportune moment that you can actually put the fire out that location. Are you in the right place? So are you in somewhat, flatter terrain? Maybe the fire is actually slowly backing down a slope. And so that can be a good way that you can attack it at there, because the fire behavior is going to be fairly relaxed. Is in an area where the fuels are different than the surrounding field. So maybe you hit an area that there's still some residue on it that's in a chem fallow field, but there's enough, it's gone through enough herbicide treatments that there's really not that much residue on it to burn. And then just real briefly touching on the right tool, I'm referring to, do you have enough water to deal with it? The problem is when you don't have a lot of water, you can run out fairly quickly. But the other thing is, if you have your big farm truck with your 500-gallon water tank, that moves fairly slowly, and especially in rough terrain, it's going to take a while to get the water to where it's needed. So that's why often having these bladder bags or having a small mobile unit on a UTV, this one looks pretty fancy, but even a simpler setup on your UTV or four-wheeler could make it fairly accessible to get to where those flames are at. And just real briefly touching here on, where do fires start, particularly in combines, just as an example. And so that they find, obviously a lot of these, it makes sense. Most of them happen in the engine area where most of the heat is being produced on this piece of equipment. So, we talked about diesel tanks. Those are not as likely to burn as some other areas here on the combine. But again, if you have diesel or other lubrication leaking, that can be an easy way for a fire to start. Or if a fire does start, it's an easy way for it to spread into certain areas. So I really suggest that you consider getting one of these laser temperature probes that basically just turn it on, and basically you point that laser whatever part of the piece of equipment you're curious how hot it is. And in particularly, these are useful if you're worried about bearings that are getting extra hot on your equipment. And so, basically taking the temperature of some of these different bearings, maybe on a daily basis, can really help alert a malfunction that could happen. And so up here, basically, what sort of temperature should you expect your bearing to be at? And basically, if it's starting to get up around 250, that could be a concern. And so if it's over 300 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when they suggest you really need to turn off your equipment, and there's a good chance you're going to have a bearing failure. It's going to impact your equipment. And if, any chaff or residue from your wheat lands on this, it's going to burn fairly quickly. And again, with taking the temperature, it's important because the majority of the fires happen when crop residue here at, 40% of the fires in combines start from crop residue being ignited on different parts of the equipment. So that's why it's so important to take those bearing temperatures and try to prevent residue from landing on exhaust components where it's really hot. Okay, so just a real quick shout out. I've been in the process over the last year working on an OSU online course. They've done a few simpler, more basic online courses in the past for wildfire suppression safety for ag producers. And so this is going to be a more kind of more formal and more interactive course, hopefully, that I'm working on, that's going to be online through OSU. So basically one course on wildfire preparedness in agriculture. And that course will cover a lot of the OSHA required plans that producers need if you have employees for engaging wildland fires. And so, basically emergency action plan, fire prevention plan, those sorts of plans are going to be discussed in that class. You can also go to this link down here to a website where I have a lot of that information all restored. If you go there, you'll be able to download some of these example templates that will help you on your farm. And then also a more involved course on ag wildfire behavior and suppression, basically going more in depth on the things I just kind of discussed briefly here. And so this course could be helpful, if you have seasonal employees that are coming on that you just want them to at least know the basics of what to expect if a fire were to happen. this course could be helpful for them. It's also helpful for producers that, even if you've been doing this for several decades, maybe you might learn a few new things out of these classes that might help. So just wanted to advertise that while I have a moment. The Wildfire Preparedness and Ag course should be ready for people to start taking before fire season. The Ag Wildfire Behavior course should be done in time basically for fire season if you had seasonals that were coming on. So I'll keep you in the loop on those. The other thing is fire rehabilitation for crop fields. I mentioned to Ariel just now how there's different funding sources that help with that. Different producers make different decisions. And for me, I'm really trying to help with this nexus of basically the intersection of, agronomic concerns with wildfire rehabilitation. And so I'm really interested in trying to do research on burned crop fields. If people have done different things, comparing people who've done winter cover crops, people who have, just left the ground fallow compared to people who have maybe just done some light disking to scarcify the soil to improve and reduce soil and water erosion. So those are just some thoughts. Just any producers on this call, if there's a wildfire that happens on your property, I really would love to go out there and try to document the impacts of the different rehabilitation strategies that are out there. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for your attention today. I know we went over here just a little bit, so I appreciate you sticking around. Again, if you have not put in the chat your full name as you would like on a certificate at the end of this, please type your name in. Most of you have already typed your name in. If you typed that in earlier, I've already got it recorded here. So, and also Rick Fletcher put in the chat this video that ODF produced explaining mobile tack with engines. I've used that in some of my classes I've done before. It's a very helpful video. It's, 10 minutes long, and it really does have good information pertinent to what a lot of the wheat producers out here are dealing with when they have grass or wheat fires. So thanks again for sharing that, Rick.
Thanks, Jacob. And just like to add, again, just to put another plug in with the expansion of the rangeland program and with my new position, even if we're not formed up as rangeland folks quite yet, would really love the opportunity to come out and chat and do some trainings with folks if there's an interest with anybody in the area. That's part of my job. I get to put that stuff on in person or virtually, kind of whatever folks want. So,
yeah, thank you for sticking through the whole meeting, Rick. And if people have concerns about potential site visit on how they can improve defensible space around their farm shops, like, is that something that you would still be able to do if people were interested?
Yeah, especially now that we're kind of expanding outside of the typical borders. So getting to get out in the wheat country and cover everything from Wasco through Umatilla counties there. So happy to come out and do that.
Great. Thank you.